I don't think there's enough time for the economy to turn around in a way that benefits the Democrats. And if it is a pocketbook election, then that favors Trump and the Republicans. And so that's why I think they should, if I were them, I would focus on that almost exclusively, because that is a weak issue. And she's the incumbent in this case.
What do you make of it? I mean, it was a bit of a surprise in the end, wasn't it? There's a lot of talk it was going to be Josh Shapiro, particularly bearing in mind where she was going to be, and Pennsylvania being such an important swing state. Were you surprised? Was it the right choice?
I was slightly surprised. I was thinking it would be Shapiro, and I thought it should be Shapiro for various reasons. So I was somewhat surprised this morning when I heard it was going to be Walz, although not shocked. And so it's an interesting choice. At first, I thought really it was a mistake by her because I felt she needed a sister soldier moment, and Shapiro could have been the start of one. And would help her move to the middle, which I think is important. Obviously, Walz is more of a traditional progressive like she is, and so she seems to be kind of doubling down on that, and so we'll see.
Tell me why you thought Shapiro is the right guy then, actually, before we move on to Walz.
Well, I thought he might make a marginal difference in Pennsylvania, which is a huge part of her path to victory, and so he's very popular there. He knows how to speak to Trump supporters. He had votes from Trump supporters when he was running, and so he had a capacity to reach people in that world, including in the other Rust Belt states. And so I thought he would provide that kind of energy, as well as be someone who's obviously not afraid to stake out moderate positions for the Democratic Party and signal a willingness on her part to move to the middle. That's not entirely clear now. I think she may have chosen Walz because they're a stronger fit together, and they certainly match each other's enthusiasm, and they've generated enthusiasm. I don't think personally that's enough to win, but I might be wrong.
Did Gaza have an impact on not choosing Shapiro, who was more critical of pro-Palestinian protests than perhaps some people in Kamala's base would want him to be?
That may have played some role. In fact, I thought that might be a reason she should pick him, because the having a sister soldier moment means having some controversy, and that would have generated some controversy. But I think it would have been helpful or good controversy for her. She's chosen to avoid that. I don't think they're going to avoid demonstrations at the convention either way. And of course, the developments in the Middle East are going to really become more clear and obvious in the coming days, I'm afraid. And so she's going to have to confront that issue either way.
Walz has this thing. There's a thing in America known as Minnesota nice. Midwestern nice, but Minnesota nice is particularly a thing. That Minnesota is a state which associates itself with plain, folksy kindness. It prides itself on kindness. And that's a shtick he will really want to play up to, in contrast with Trump, who's a felon, and Vance, who people think can be painted as a more suspicious fellow. How big a deal is that, do you think, Minnesota nice in all this?
Well, it's modestly helpful, although frankly the VP candidate traditionally is the attack dog, and so he's going to have to play that role. He does, I do admit that he comes across as a regular guy. He seems to be a regular guy in many ways, and I think that is helpful to her, although he hasn't apparently managed to win over the rural parts of his own state. So I'm not sure that it carries very far. I think ultimately it's going to be a race between sort of enthusiasm and optimism versus what the record is and what people want in the future. So there's going to be a race to define who he is and who she is for the voters.
And Minnesota is, of course, the place where George Floyd happened. The Republicans will say George Floyd, the response to George Floyd was a failure of law and order. It was a failure to get a grip on the riotous consequences of what happened there. And that kind of falls a bit on Walz. Is that a problem for him, do you think?
In the short term, yes. I think they'll certainly raise that issue. The fact that he didn't call out the National Guard for 3 or 4 days, that was problematic. Although at the same time, both parties need to focus on the future, not so much the past. I do think on Trump's side, they need to isolate maybe 2 to 3 major issues that they have with the Harris Walz team and focus on that. They shouldn't take a scattergun approach. they need to hone in on a couple things, namely focusing on immigration and the economy, which I think are their strongest issues, and just kind of focus on that and not get distracted by a bunch of different issues, which is not going to work, I don't think.
Let's talk about the economy briefly, if we may, Jim, because we were looking at the figures on Friday, slowdown to an American economy. That's had an impact on Wall Street. It's had an impact on stock markets around the world. There's a fear, interest rates are not going down as quickly as people thought they might be. Inflation looks a bit stickier than people would have wanted it to be. I presume the Democrats' greatest fear is that they're fighting this election in the autumn on the back of an economy that is stagnating. And that could be their biggest, whatever you say about personalities, whatever you say about Trump and Vance and Walz and Kamala, the legacy of Biden, his infirmity, all of that stuff. Is that going to be their central issue? If the economy slows into an election, that's a problem for the incumbent, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough time for the economy to turn around in a way that benefits the Democrats. And if it is a pocketbook election, then that favors Trump and the Republicans. And so that's why I think they should, if I were them, I would focus on that almost exclusively, because that is a weak issue. And she's the incumbent in this case. Some people are making a comparison between her and Obama. The big difference is Obama was the challenger in 2008 when the economy was melting down, and McCain was the incumbent, and McCain couldn't grapple with the issue when Obama was the fresh face. So she can't replicate that because she owns part of what's happening.
And where are we then, Jim? Just finally, we're heading into the convention. There'll be a convention bounce. You'd have thought the Republicans got a convention bounce. We've had the Kamala is not Biden bounce. She's now brought this guy in who's pretty nice, and so there might be a little bit of a nice bounce, particularly for people who are already going to vote Democrat anyway. It looks like the polls are favoring Kamala in the way they weren't favoring Biden. How would you call the election now? A lot of the players have shifted. Where are we? However many months out before November. How are you calling it?
Yeah, I don't really believe any polls until maybe the second week in September. They're really jumping around. It's quite close. I guess the question is this going to be an election that's converting the undecideds, or is it going to be a turnout election, enthusiasm and turnout? I think the Democrats may be hoping it's an enthusiasm election, whereas the Republicans need to make it a conversion of the undecideds. Frankly, both sides should make it converting the undecideds, because they need to win those people in the middle who have voted in the past for both Biden and Trump. Those are the people that are going to decide the election, particularly in the swing states.
And too close to call now?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it may remain that way up until October.
Amazing. Well, it's a fascinating time, Jim. We're very lucky to have you to explain it to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.